Hello, my friend. Welcome back to the Mindset Check podcast. I'm your host, Misha McKittrick. This is a podcast where I believe that as you take time for a mindset check, you have more power than you think you do. And where we also believe that we have a choice in the way that we focus on the traits of the people in our life. And when we choose to focus on the good, we give ourselves grace, and we also amplify being able to see and enjoy the whole person. I'm excited to get into that with you today. Before we start, I want to share with you a few words from one of our listeners. Her name is Brooke. She said, "Your podcasts are seriously heaven sent. I feel like your story is a mini version of what I'm going through at the moment. It feels so good to know that I am not alone." You know what? That's the beauty of all of our stories. When we really get real and share with each other, it's incredible how it unlocks the hearts of the people that we are around. And as we share our stories, we learn so much about ourselves. So I just wanted to share that with you, both to say thank you to Brooke, but also just to encourage you to share yourself and, who you really are, especially with the people that are close to you. Okay, before we jump into today's podcast episode, I just want to remind you of some things that the podcast really is about. This is a podcast where we explore how heart-centered living and mindset shifts can transform the way we experience life, how it allows us to focus on what truly matters and embrace the beauty in ourselves, in others, and in the world around us. In every single episode, we dive deep into ways that help us to see that we have more power than we think we do, by exploring our choices and how those choices alter our inner state, right? Like what happens inside of our body, in our heart, and in our mind. And how this is the very fabric of what creates our next day and our next day and our next day, and therefore our life. I'm excited to jump into today's episode with you. Let's get started. Have you ever recognized something that your partner has done or hasn't done? And the moment that you recognize that thing in a critical way, all of a sudden you seem to recognize a lot of what they haven't done all at once, or something that bothers you that they have done. Like you recognize more of that all at one time. Or have you ever been so bothered by something, let's just say, any person, let's say an in-law, right? Someone in your family did. And in that moment, every single bad thing that they have done seems to be highlighted in your brain. Isn't it interesting that one bad thing tends to bring up lots of bad things? Today, we're going to chat about how and why our brain does this. And how do we work our way out of it? Like, how do we get on the other side of it? Rick Hansen said, "The mind is like Velcro for negative experiences and Teflon for positive ones." It's really interesting how when we do focus on negative traits, it causes us to miss opportunities, right? The deeper connection, the appreciation of a person. It allows us to zero in on their shortcomings and in the same time prevents us from seeing their value. And so the science behind this is something that's called negativity bias, okay? This is how the human brain is actually wired to focus on the negative. And the reason why our brains are wired this way is because it helped our ancestors who were really in a state of survival mechanisms. It allowed them to stay safe from threats. It's a natural tendency that can make us overlook the good and focus more on the bad because that's what allowed us to survive, right? Like back in the days of like needing to survive. Negativity bias is a cognitive bias, okay? It's a thing that we do in our brain that causes us to tip the scale towards focusing on negative events or feelings that typically have a more significant impact on our brain, on our mind, like our psychological state, right? Versus positive feelings, even when they're of equal proportion. And it's interesting because we are wired this way, it shows up in all of our places. It shows up in our intimate relationships. It shows up in our friendships. It shows up in teamwork and our interactions in the workplace. It can show up everywhere. And there are tons of research studies that show evidence of the negativity bias, right? Like where negative stimuli, like a critical moment, provokes stronger and more immediate emotional responses than positive stimuli of equal intensity. That like makes my heart fall because it's true. Like I think that we all go, yeah, that's true. You take one moment of criticism and how much it can affect you, especially depending on your state, which we're going to dive into more, versus taking something that was like a compliment and how much it tends to stay with you. And so there's all different types of research papers, you know, the negativity effect or research on emotional reactions, emotional memory research, all kinds of studies that find that people not only remember negative images more vividly, but also feel more emotional about them compared to, you know, positive images or experiences and all of these different things. Negativity bias can also explain why we can have a whole pile of good that becomes bypassed when one bad thing happens, right? It's so weird how our life can be going so well and one bad thing kind of throws a major hiccup in our plans when we've got all of this momentum towards something else. It's the reason why not knowing how to do one thing can stop us from doing all the things. It can completely like cripple us, right? It's simply just that our brain responds more intensely to negative stimuli than neutral or positive stimuli. So how can we overcome it? That's like, how do we step outside of it? And really, like a short answer is just saying we see it, we learn about it, we understand it, we recognize it, and we choose to move past it. So when this happens to you, like in the next week, right, when something negative comes up and it tends to make a ripple effect for all of the good, and you go ding, 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 this is my brain responding in that negativity, and then you choose to be able to overstep it and say like, I don't have to believe that thing. I don't have to believe all the thoughts I think. I don't have to sit in a space where I'm so attached to that one thing. I'm going to take a breath and I'm going to redirect my attention. I'm going to come into a different feeling. I'm going to come into a different state. I'm going to reinforce a better belief. So in a nutshell, that's how we overcome it. I want to share with you a story that I found on Mark Angel, and it's about a guy who on his 37th birthday, after spending his entire adult life loosely dating different women, he finally decided he was ready to settle down. He wanted to find a real mate, a lover, a life partner, someone who could show him what it meant to be in a deep, monogamous, trusting relationship. So he searched far and wide. There were so many women to choose from, all with great qualities, but none with everything he was looking for. And then finally, just when he thought he would never find her, he found her. And she was perfect. She had everything he had ever wanted in a woman, and he rejoiced. He knew how rare it was to find a woman like this. And he said, I've done my research, and you're the one for me. But as the days turned into weeks and into months and into years, he started to realize that she was far from perfect. She had issues with trust and self-confidence. She liked to be silly when he wanted to be serious, and she was much messier than he was. And he started to have doubts about her, doubts about himself, doubts about everything. And to validate these doubts, he subconsciously tested her. He consciously looked around their apartment for things that weren't clean, just to prove that she was messy. He decided to go out alone to parties with his single guy friends just to prove that she had trust issues. He set her up and waited for her to do something silly just to prove she couldn't be serious. It went on like this for a while. As the tests continued, and as she, clearly shaken and confused, failed more and more often, he became more and more convinced that she was not a perfect fit for him after all, because he had dated women in the past who were more mature, more confident, and more willing to have serious conversations. Inevitably, he found himself at a crossroads. Should he continue to be in a relationship with a woman who he once thought was perfect, but now realizes is lacking the qualities he already found in the other women that came before her? Or should he return to the lifestyle he had come from, drifting from one empty relationship to the next? And this is what he learned from Mark and Angel. One of the greatest lessons we learn in life is that we are often attracted to a bright light in another person. Initially, this light is all we see. It's so bright and beautiful, but after a while, our eyes adjust. We notice this light is accompanied by a shadow, and oftentimes a fairly large one. When we see this shadow, we have two choices. We can either shine our own light on the shadow, or we can run from it and continue searching for a shadowless light. If we decide to run from the shadow, we must also run from the light that created it. And soon we find out that our light is the only light illuminating the space around us. Then at some point, we look closer at our own light. We notice something out of the ordinary. Our light is casting a shadow too. And our shadow is bigger and darker than some of the other shadows we've seen. If, on the other hand, instead of running from the shadow, we decide to walk towards it, something amazing happens. We inadvertently cast our own light on the shadow, and likewise, the light that created this shadow casts its light on ours. Gradually, both shadows begin to disappear. Not completely, of course, but every part of the two shadows that are touched by the other person's light illuminate and disappear. And as a result, we each find more of that bright, beautiful light in the other person, which is precisely what we've been searching for all along. My friend, news flash. You are not going to like all the parts of all the people in your life. Maybe you could just focus on the things that you do like about them. It's interesting how noticing the bad parts of another human being can help you justify maybe why you're keeping distance from them, or why you're not talking to them, or why they don't fit with you, or whatever it is. But it is crazy unhealthy because it affects your vibration, almost on a level where you don't even recognize and see it. And the things that you are thinking about other people in your life will follow suit because your brain likes patterns, right? It knows wavelength and energy and frequency. And so as long as you affirm the parts that you don't like about them, you continue to attract people that have things that you don't like about them, which is funny because all human beings are going to have parts that we don't like. We have parts about our own self that we don't like, even though our ego tries to tell us a different story about that. Our ego tries to tell ourselves that we don't have those parts, like we're special. I hope that you laugh a little bit about that. But what's really important to notice is that every time you affirm something that you don't like about another person, you keep distance between you and them. So if noticing the way that they chew their food really irks you, or noticing that they aren't talkative enough, or they're too talkative, or they don't keep their house the way that you keep yours, or the way that they value like being on time differently than you do, or really like anything that we can really zero in on and nitpick, it really keeps us at an arm's length from those people, and we miss out on who they really are when we do that. It is so vital for us to see that we are not perfect so that we can give other people the grace and the space to not be perfect also. The duality of a human being is beautiful. Like, we all have light and darkness. We are incredible and we are flawed. We can see another person outside of us that is a giant in so many categories and also has a little way of being sneaky in jokey ways that kind of gets under our skin, right? Let me tell you something. That little thing is what makes us human. And we have it too. Maybe someone in your life is a giant in so many ways, and they're also a little bit feisty. That makes them human. Maybe they're a giant in so many ways, and at times they're critical too. Again, it's what makes them human. And so we, as the observer, as the person that has our eyes opening just a little bit more to try to see the situation for what it is that that's actually happening. Like, we're actually taking a moment to evaluate it. We just try and tip the scale to be more weighted towards the giant, and we give grace and love and acceptance to the space that tips you away from being like seeing their giantness. And we fully recognize that we carry those things with us too. I think that is one of the biggest keys to allowing everybody else in our life to be human. You cannot have one without the other. You can just keep trying to be a better human yourself and giving everyone the space to just be human. And by doing that, we're giving someone the benefit of the doubt. We're saying, I truly believe that they are doing the best that they can do, because the best that they can do is truly all that they have their eyes open to and what they are conscious towards and what they're allowing themselves to see. Does that make sense? Like, even if people are not operating from the standpoint of the best that we think that they can do, maybe they're operating from the best that they think they could do. And that is where we gain like a lot of freedom to not miss out on the best parts of them. Being human is a lot like the lotus flower that grows from the mud. The mud is messy and difficult circumstances, right? But the beauty often grows out of those difficult circumstances. And can you imagine just getting so stuck on the mud and not being able to see the beauty of the lotus flower? That is a practical application of something in nature that just allows us to see that the lotus flower is both. It is not one without the other. And that is also how humans are. So coming out of looking at these ways that we pin people for like ticky-tacky things that like aren't the way that we want things to go in life, but yet what it really is a challenge for us to get over the judgment. It's really so interesting because the people that are in your life that you have a difficult time with, they really are just presenting to you an opportunity. When we see it that way, we allow ourselves to grow. We allow ourselves to see the full spectrum of beauty of this person. And then because we're focusing on that, it changes our relationship, and it also changes the possibilities of that person because of what we ascribe to them, the energy that we give to them. One of the greatest ways to like help ourselves get over this is, I think, to practice being let down and being okay with it. I love the story of the man who goes into Starbucks and he will just, when he's going through the line, he'll just say, hey, can I have one of those muffins for free? Or can I get a discount on my drink or whatever? And he knows that they're going to say no, but he's literally practicing hearing no and like being really okay with it. Like being okay with it not going your way. And somehow that is prepping him for all the things in his business, in his relationships, in all the ways of things to not go his way. It's such a beautiful way to like outwardly challenge yourself to hear that. And gosh, I can remember being, oh my word, this is actually really, really sad for me because I used to force a lot. A lot. Like I can remember things going wrong when I was on my way to get my engagement pictures. And I mean, it was things like something to do with my shirt and the way that it was ironed or had like a mark from the iron on it or something. I was so like, my energy was just so like, frustrated, you know, like I couldn't get over it. And it was a tiny little thing that altered the energy of that experience. And I think when we practice letting go in moments like that, when things aren't going our way, where we can kind of just say like, okay, let's see how this plays out. Or maybe there's something better waiting, or, you know, giving ourselves the benefit of the doubt in that moment allows us to give other people the benefit of the doubt as well. So you notice that the people who are the most uptight with themselves are also the most like frustrating to be around because they are so uptight with you. So if we can just learn to like kind of melt those edges a little bit, we overcome not just that feeling inside of ourselves, but the way that it is to be around other people when they don't do things our way. And maybe it's one thing that they do and we're literally throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Like you're taking the very best part of what you could experience with a person and just being like, okay, we're done. I'm done with you. And I feel like it's so easy to do in our day because we have so much access to people, like friendships, and also like it's really okay to be alone in our day. Like we don't depend on our neighbors as much or on our friends as much. You know, family is really like at the top of the list of like a relationship that you probably want to make sure that you're trying to do it right, you know, because it's there no matter what. I mean, and there are times when we are not around our family for whatever reason. Maybe there's boundaries, maybe there's other issues, whatever there is. But I'm just trying to help us see that like the more that we overcome ourselves, the more that we allow people to be in our space and be perfectly flawed and also recognize that there is this flower growing out of the mud. One thing that we can do when we notice that we're being like ticky-tacky with other people is we can try to look at what's happening inside of us in that moment. So it's interesting that when we're doing well emotionally, there's a lot of things that fade into the background of like what other people do. And then when stress is higher and sleep fails to restore you, it's likelier that the negative parts of others make an appearance. It's interesting how it's really so much about us, how it points back to us. I remember recently there was a day where I had started to notice all of these things that Jake had done that were like really bothering me, my husband, really under my skin. And it was like 2 or 3 things kind of in a row that I was really noticing. And then I remember being in my closet and I was, get this, like if this isn't like putting you into perspective, it's like I'm sitting there in my closet and I'm putting away my clothes. And I'm like, he didn't fold this right, or this is supposed to be hung up or whatever. And it was folded or vice versa or whatever. And I was like finding myself being critical, and I truly was frustrated. And then it was in that moment that I was like, Misha, he did the laundry. We good. And I noticed that like that had to do with how I was feeling, and how so much of what I had been picking apart in my brain wasn't even really about him. Sure, they were things that he was doing that like maybe I wouldn't have done it that way. But isn't that okay? Isn't that okay? And so I think anytime that you're feeling that ticky-tacky with other people, look at how you're feeling. And then also start to notice that when you focus on what they are doing that you like, how that makes you feel. So if you can have a moment where you find yourself in this fork in the road, that's where we want to get to. We want to get to the point where we're recognizing that we are like we're being resigned and cynical and unloving towards people, right? And that there's a fork in the road, and we can go, oh my word. Like I can continue to focus on that, or I can go down a different road. The more that we can teach ourselves to be in that fork, to notice, the opportunity we have in our focus, that's when we're really going to start winning. Because once we start to focus on what they do that we love, we can notice also how when we focus on that, how it makes us feel. It completely shifts that for us. It helps us feel grateful and happy and joyful. I also love in this space to be able to affirm something. Like I'm choosing to focus on my partner's best traits, or I choose to give my in-law the benefit of the doubt, or I love blank about this person, right? So like, and then say it to yourself. Say that to yourself, like write it on a lot of times I'll have like a to-do list, and I'll write an affirmation at the bottom. And so like every time I'm kind of looking and checking in with that, I also see that affirmation and I'm like, yes, yes, yes. That's where my focus is, so that I can kind of retrain myself to come into a different space. There is another side of this that is really beautiful, and we've touched on it a little bit, but people generally live up to the expectations that are placed on them. I know that it's difficult to for me to sit on the other side of the microphone and tell you what that looks like for your situation. But the one thing that I can tell you is the more that you're crafting a space for you to be in, where you're allowing grace and love to permeate the situation, the more that naturally rubs off on them. And yes, it does take patience. It takes you being in that for a while for it to show up differently in your relationship, right? There's an application from nature that we can look at that helps us kind of see this differently. And it's the bamboo metaphor. So a lot of times when a bamboo is new at growing, they grow deep before they grow tall. So they grow under the ground before you see them, before it completely flourishes as a plant. And a lot of times once it's reached its potential low, all of a sudden it sprouts up quickly. And it's really important for us to remember that, because a lot of times we invest in loving a person only to give up very quickly. We invest in seeing the best parts of them and then get frustrated, because that's our own human nature. And so it's really important to just remember that you continue to nurture and love that bamboo plant. And really, it's about more than hoping that person changes. It's about allowing that person to be whoever they are, with whatever choices that they want to have in life, and for you to be in a space where you love and accept them in a way that doesn't allow you to miss out on their beautiful parts. To say humans are both and. Like, you're never really going to get around people walking around with imperfections. We are beautifully imperfect. I love this quote by Shakti Gawain that says, "The more light you allow within you, the brighter the world you live in will be." And so the reality is that your reality is formed inside of your brain. And if you continue to live in a state where you believe the best about people, where you really see their beauty in spite of everything else that might trip other people, that's still your reality. That's still where you get to exist. And it's a much more beautiful space than sitting in the negativity about the bad parts about another human being. And then you give your own self space to be the same. Perfectly, beautifully flawed. I'm really hoping that today's episode helps you to reflect on the relationships that you carry and to even reflect on the ones that you kind of struggle with, that you might have a hard time inside of. And practice focusing on the good in others, choosing to see the full person and not just their flaws. Because what we focus on creates our beliefs, and when we create our beliefs, we're creating our whole lives. I'm hoping that you can see that by calling out this negativity bias that our brain tends to naturally focus on, and by choosing to focus on something different, you have more power than you think you do. Thank you for tuning in to the Mindset Check podcast today. If today's episode resonated with you, I would invite you to subscribe, share, or leave a review for the Mindset Check podcast. Also, you can support the podcast by shopping on Amazon using our affiliate link. And that really just looks like, instead of going to Amazon.com, you go to Amazon.com/shop/my friend Misha. And remember, when we give grace to others, we not only allow ourselves that same space, but we get to create more of the good we are intent on focusing on. I'll leave you with a quote by Eric Wilson, who says, "To be human is to be beautifully flawed." Join me next time as we continue to learn about the power you have in the tiny choices you have every single day. Until next time, my friend.